Command Point now has merch. Link in the description. Warzone Studio was kind enough to send out a couple of their battle mats for us to review, and I have to say, you guys, I absolutely love them. The mats we received have the kill team layout on them, making it quicker and easier to place objectives and terrain pieces to create a good play experience. The mousepad material the mats are made from is an upgrade from the foldable cardstock boards that you are used to seeing come in kill team boxes. Warzone Studio are even helping support the channel by giving us a kickback for each order placed using the link in the description below. So make sure to check them out, and thank you to Warzone Studio for sponsoring this video.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Command Point, and welcome to the 6th day of Kill Team. Yesterday, I believe we talked about Chaos Cults, and today we're diving in a totally different direction, a totally different type of team, a totally different vibe, and we're going to be talking about the Phobos Strike Team. And I'm joined here by Mark Garrett, who took the Phobos Strike Team to 5-0 at Kansas City Open. He brought him to Atlanta at the World Championships, and you played him a bunch. And Mark, first of all, how's it going?
Oh, it's going great, Shane. Thanks for having me, and Merry early Christmas and Happy
Yeah.
Holidays.
Yeah, it's a great time. I love the holidays. It's one of my favorite times of the year. So I've just been soaking it in, doing these interviews, and having a good time with all that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
So
Yeah, so let's jump in.
yeah, so I mean, I guess the first thing I ask everybody is when you're like from the perspective of somebody that hasn't played Phobos, that is, you know, perusing the list of kill teams that are out there, of which there are many at this point, but they're looking at Phobos. Phobos has caught their eye. As a seasoned Phobos player, how would you describe their play style? Like how would you describe the way that they kind of operate?
Yeah, sure. I think I think of them as a board control team. And you can kind of think of their play style as I call it hit, fade, and frustrate. So, you know, so with hit, you can take four guys who hit on a two up on this team. The Reaver Sergeant, the Marksman, the Incursor Mine Layer, and the Infiltrator Saboteur. And I haven't looked at every single team in the game, but I think probably you would have to take all custodians to find another team with four operatives hitting on two up. And that means that, even though you don't do a ton of damage with Phobos, your shooting is reliable. And once you factor in deadly shots and a veteran infiltrator with balance, it's just a constant stream of reliable chip damage. So hit, fade, and frustrate, right? So fade, you have so many guys who can get work done while on conceal. The mine layer and the saboteur can be in conceal, and their bombs can still go off. Your marksman can track target from conceal, and a Reaver can't charge from conceal, but they still have a lot of work to do with effectively 5 APL on action-intensive missions. And then on top of that, you've got guerrilla warfare that lets you change your order for one action point. So after the first turning point, you take your shots, then you flip back to conceal to remain untouchable. And finally, out of those three prongs of playstyle, frustrate. With Phobos, you try to figure out what your opponent's plan is and disrupt it. And we just have so many tools of disruption. So your infiltrators, they can just look at someone and say, hey, you have to go later. Incursors ignore obscuring, meaning your opponent is going to spend a lot of mental energy just trying not to get shot. The Haywire Mine is a 6-inch bubble of interference, and on a 5-up crit, it stops movement immediately. The Saboteur's remote explosives are a 6-inch bubble that can delete multiple operatives. And the Marksman's tracked target can shoot an enemy operative off the board even after you're out of activations. The Marksman in particular, it's just one of those pieces that occupies an outsized place in your opponent's head. It's kind of like the Blooded Ogre.
Yeah, the Incursor Marksman, my limited time playing Phobos, he's always been my favorite guy on that team, and he does get a lot of work done.
He does. He's certainly the MVP. The Marksman and the Mine Layer, I think, are the two MVPs of the team.
Mhm. So, Mark, I guess specifically as a player, both as a competitive and any other angle you want to come at it from, what about that playstyle appealed to you and made you like want to stick with this team?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so but what made me want to stick with the team, first of all? I picked them up back when they were in like the 30% win rate.
Yeah.
I mean, they stunk for a while, but it just didn't matter because I find the sneakiness, I find the craftiness, I find the disruption that we talked about a minute ago. It's just so much fun. It's just kind of what I want a kill team to do. I'm a little bit older, as you know, than a lot of the average kill team players, I guess I would say, and so maybe maybe the power fantasy is a little bit different. I don't necessarily kind of have to smash stuff like I wanted to when I was younger. I like the craftiness and the tactics of Phobos now.
Oh, that's a really good answer. I like that. They're definitely they're kind of a weird team in the way that they play, and I tend to like weird teams too, despite being a Legionnaire player. So I understand where you're coming from. Um,
Yep.
so let's turn the page a little bit. Um, one of my favorite questions to ask, I ask this to everybody. I asked it last year, and this year I care more about it than I did then. Is I think when you're learning a new team, and you're especially with whether it's an experienced player or an inexperienced player, I think that one of the trickiest things to overcome when you're kind of getting your groove with a faction is learning how to play turn one and knowing exactly what your kind of win conditions are and what you want to get done, and how to pivot to when you see different things on the other side of the table. So what's your general approach to Turning Point One, and how you run Phobos in the early game?
Yeah, sure. I think Phobos, especially for new players, is a little bit easy to overthink. You can fall into the trap of thinking too hard as a Phobos player, especially when you're kind of trying to ramp up. So just take a starting lineup and stick with this. Take Reaver Sergeant, Incursor Marksman, Incursor Mine Layer. Usually you want your Infiltrator Veteran with lethal 5 up and balanced, Infiltrator Helix, and the Reaver Warrior. As you kind of build out your skills, you can drop some of those guys and sub in some others. For example, if a board is really especially wide open, I might take the Incursor Sergeant instead of the Reaver Sergeant to get some early shots. But I got to tell you, I've also had the experience, for example, of playing against Leander, my son, his Geller pox at a tournament, and still not getting a single shot in the first turning point, even on wide open terrain. So, depending on your opponent's skill level, you can't count on getting early shots. So again, just take that standard lineup and then think everybody's got a job to be done. And your first decision when looking at the board and looking at your opponent is you need to think, can I afford to go out grabby? And do I have to go out grabby? For example, some teams like I guess Blooded and Chaos Cult, they build momentum as they go. So you're gonna have to go out and grab some early points. You're gonna have to go out and kill some operatives really quickly if you want to win against teams like that. Turning point one, I think, is mostly about shaping the battlefield. You're going to take Vanguard 9 times out of 10, so you can move as far up the board as possible. I mean, really, if you got nothing better to do, take Vanguard. Your Mine Layer should probably be your first or second activation, and his one only job to be done is to pick an objective that you know is going to be contested and plant the Haywire Mine on it. Your Marksman, his job is to suppress movement with track target. A Reaver should turn on Terror and move up the board, mostly to grab a point and set a turning point to charge. If you're going into elites, then he can set up a stealth assault for turning point two. If you're going into a horde, then he can set up a charge fight shoot. So maybe you can often position him. I mean, mobility is so good with the Reaver grab shoot plus Vanguard that maybe he can block a door on an open board, but still be on an objective and be ready to charge through that door in turning point two. Your sergeant needs to strategize to help you kind of stay abreast on CP because we are a very CP hungry team. The Helix should position himself to keep your marksman alive. And then your veteran positions so that you can do a couple things. He needs to see critical operatives at the beginning of turning point two in order to omni scramble. This is especially important because your marksman, most often is going to be on vantage and the smoke is going to dissipate at the end of turning point one. So that veteran needs to be ready to shut down a first activation in case your opponent gets initiative in turning point two. You don't want your marksman getting shot off the board. So ideally in turning point two, then, your long range shooters are going to be set up to shoot, and flip back to conceal. Your Reaver Warrior with stealth assault, or get in 2-for-1 trades, and that all is going to get set up in turning point one. I find, Shane, often I don't even roll the dice in the first turning point. It's really just all about setup. You really shouldn't give your opponent any shots, and you might not need to do any shooting. And that's your TP1.
All right, awesome. That's a really good answer. So let's change the I guess context a little bit, and I want you to think back to any game you've played with Phobos, whether it was at a tournament or at just at local store, at home, um, and try to envision the absolute coolest Phobos play you've ever made, where somebody might have seen it from that wasn't even at the table, and thought, wow, Phobos is sweet. I need to play this team. So what's the coolest Phobos play you've ever made?
Okay, yeah. I like that. I gotta think on that for a second. That's a great question.
That's a tough one.
Um, yeah. Okay. Well, so okay. Here's a recent one that I think that can show the depth of the team. On day three of the World Champs, I was playing against Brandon, a guy from the Pacific Northwest, and he took blooded. He's not just a great kill team player, he's also just a fantastic guy with so much positive energy. The mission was, I believe it was secure, and it was on approach, which is one of the diagonal deployments. Um, Usually my marksman drops a smoke at his own feet to stay safe, turning point one, move smoke, go on guard. But like that's not cheap. That's 3 EP for a smoke, and it's basically a lot of resources to protect one guy. And so I was looking at the board against Brandon's blooded and picking my equipment. And it just hit me. Blocking just one firing lane can protect something like 75% of your deployment zone. And it was like a light went off over my head. You take a reaver with a grab shoot and give him the smoke.
Hmm.
So once I realized that, of course, I put Vanguard up. The Reaver turns on Terror for free. He moves 7 inches. He throws the smoke another 6 inches and then dashes 3 inches onto an objective, secures that objective for free. It's one guy, effectively 5 APL, locking down a lane that's going to protect the other five, right? So instead of spending 3 EP to protect one guy, it's 3 EP to effectively protect your entire team. I was able to grab 4 points on a wide deployment and didn't give him any shots on turning point one. I
Wow,
think that's just it's what I love so much about playing Phobos is that you can have such an efficient action economy, and you can play them for a year and then suddenly kind of realize, oh, there's a better way to play them. I can kind of always get better with this team.
that's awesome. Really cool. So
Thanks. May I tell you? Sorry to interrupt you. I should tell you the rest of the story though. After I just told you this brilliant play I made against Brandon,
okay.
even though he was on the back foot, he came from behind and he fought me to a draw. So
Ooh,
I think he lost initiative either 3 or all 4 times in that game, and he still tied me. So he's probably one of my most tense and favorite games I've ever played of Kill Team.
nice. And I mean, so I guess good segue because he was playing Blooded, I believe, and Blooded
Yep.
is
Yep.
kind of notoriously a really good team against elites. So I wanted to ask you about matchups. So not necessarily specifically talking about certain factions because 6 months down the line everything could be different. So can you talk to me about what are like the characteristics of like a good matchup or a bad matchup? What does Phobos struggle with, and what are they good into?
Yeah. Yeah. Let me talk about Blooded for a second.
Hmm.
I just want to praise Games Workshop or whoever specifically wrote Phobos and Blooded and put them in the same box. I feel like that is just one of the all-time great matchups. Every time I play Blooded, it's just such a fun game. There are no feels bad rules, and those teams are just so perfectly tuned to fight each other and not really have a big advantage. So yeah, props to if anybody's thinking about picking up Kill Team or picking up a couple teams to put into your local meta, Phobos versus Blooded, it's a thrilling matchup. I think Phobos have good matchups into a lot of the Horde teams, including Blooded, but things like Star Striders, as long as you don't get whacked by one of their beams, you take an extra reaver and you just press, press, press. Once you get up close to them, they don't have a good answer. Vet guard can kind of be the same way. You're so out activated, you do have to be a little bit careful about vet guard. But they also, I mean, they have good matchups into Hearthkit and Exaction, but I guess everybody does, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Yeah, I think teams where they struggle are when you think of the teams that are just sort of like sacks of hit points, or I guess I should say just big bags of wounds. Um, it can be really hard, So Phobos into Geller Pox, if you think about one of the things we love about Phobos is so many different ways to play. So you would automatically think, okay, Geller Pox, I'm gonna take a shock grenade. Well, they can pollute your stockpile. So they can sort of take a classic Phobos tool and just take it right out of your toolkit.
Hmm.
Um, Cult, I guess, is a decent matchup because there are so many bodies that it's hard to hide on an open board. You definitely want to take an Incursor Sergeant in that case to get as many early shots as possible. And there you do want to take a shock grenade. You think about teams that sort of struggle with their action economy. I guess some cults, what they degrade by one each time they mutate in terms of how much it costs them to take action. So shock
Hmm.
grenades can be good if you're on an action intensive mission. Uh, so thinking through that, I'm not sure that I can necessarily abstract out what kind of team is difficult for Phobos to overcome. Certainly, 8 wound teams with good saves can be a little bit tricky because it's a funky break point,
Yep.
right? With bolters, tend to like going into 7 wound teams. 8 wound teams can be a challenge, and then of course, like I said, the teams that are just big walking bags of wounds, like
Right.
Gellerpox stuff. Yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. So another thing, I mean, Phobos has been out for a while, and I'm sure you've seen some other people play Phobos somewhere along the line. You were learning to play Phobos at one point, um, and one thing I think that's really helpful to talk about is what, in your experience, whether from yourself early on or watching other Phobos players, is a really common mistake that newer Phobos players make, where if they like just eliminate this one little part of their game, it's going to really improve kind of their development with the faction.
Right. Uh, yeah, I can think of two
Okay.
really common mistakes. The first one is don't go out too grabby.
Hmm.
We talked about that a little bit going out grabby. So back when primaries were capped at 12 a year ago, you could go out grabby every single time. It didn't matter if you were getting tabled in turning point 4 because you'd already maxed out your primaries and your opponent literally could not catch up. And I think that kind of made for some frustrating games. And it's a better game now that the max is 16, but it does mean you need to know when you go out grabby and when not to, because there are a bigger pool of points. I know that it took me something like 3 months after the Crit Ops pack came out to really relearn how to play Phobos. So I did have to retool. So that's the thing. Like, don't go out too grabby just because you can. Um, the second is kind of a self own. You have to make sure that your secondaries align with your overall strategy. Again, I'm pointing this out for new players because I've made this mistake so many times. For example, shock and awe. It's a fantastic secondary. I typically will max it out, but again, sticking on the theme of going out grabby, you can't take shock and awe if you plan to go out grabby. So you score shock and awe if your opponent controls an objective at the beginning of the turning point and you control it at the end. But if you take 4 objectives turning point 1, you will not have a good opportunity to score your first victory point from shock and awe until turning point 3. And you simply you will just not have the bodies left on the table in turning point 4 to score a VP for shock and awe, unless you're tabling your opponent, and you can't really count on that. Likewise, I really like guerrilla tactics as a secondary, but it's very situational. You really have to plan ahead, and you can kind of shoot yourself in the foot if you take guerrilla tactics, which requires you to have what, more than half of your guys on conceal, I think it is, and then you have to kill more guys than your opponent kills. That just requires a lot of planning to execute effectively. So again, just make sure that your secondaries align with your overall tactical and strategic plan, and you'll be fine. But if you don't plan that, then you'll be robbing yourself of secondaries, and that often can swing the game.
Okay, really, really helpful. I've definitely been a victim of taking shock and awe when I really shouldn't. It's really tempting to just take it. Um,
That's right.
all right, so on to the final question, the most awaited question, debatably. So last year I asked our guests what their favorite Christmas song is. This year I'm flipping it a little bit and I'm asking you, Mark, if you have one, what is your favorite Christmas movie?
Can I swerve? Can I pivot a little bit and give you a Christmas poem instead?
Absolutely.
May I do that?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
that's great.
cool.
I'll say my favorite Christmas poem is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight.
Oh,
It's translated by Simon Armitage. It's a Middle English poem, and it's set in King Arthur's court at Christmas time. So King
yes.
Arthur and his knights, they're feasting when the Green Knight shows up, and he issues a challenge. He says, "Anybody can chop off my head, as long as you agree to meet me a year from now, at which time I'll chop off yours." So Sir Gawain volunteers. He chops off the Green Knight's head in a single stroke, and the Green Knight picks up his own head and he says, "I'll see you in a year," and he rides out of court. And that's just like the first 5 minutes of the story. I love it. I read it literally every December. Not only it's thrilling, but it's a really lovely meditation on loyalty and honor and
Yeah.
mortality. And if you can't work a little bit of violence into your Christmas tradition, are you really even playing Kill Team?
And I believe it's a movie too, as of like recently, isn't it?
It is, I haven't seen it. This poem kind of occupies this beautiful place in
Okay.
my mind. So I don't know. Maybe you check the movie and you tell me if it's worth seeing. But yeah, I've not seen it yet.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Mark. Thank you to everybody watching, all the subscribers, Patreon people. As always, you guys rock. You keep us alive. And, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, all that good stuff. Tomorrow, on the 7th day of Christmas, we're going to be talking about Exaction Squad. So tune in then, listen to that, enjoy. In the meantime, this is Shane and Mark signing out.
Thank you, Shane.